Have you ever struggled with a particularly jealous person in your life? Have you battled with the inner turmoil that is envy or jealousy for yourself? When I was in my early 20s, I worked in a bar, and for a little while there was one other bartender who we all had a hard time liking due to her being really quite mean. One winter, I spent a few long, boring shifts entertaining myself by making little blue tack animals to sit among the dusty bottles behind the bar. It wasn't art by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd put time into it and it made people smile. So when I came into work one morning to find my carefully crafted animals all smashed together into one big angry ball, I was quite hurt. Why would someone just destroy something like that for absolutely no reason? When my friends and I discussed this over the shift, everyone just shrugged and said, maybe she's jealous. Now, I've got no idea if that's what it really was. I didn't have much to be jealous of at that time in my life, but anything's possible. Either way, this story often springs to mind when I consider jealousy. I think we've all had experiences one way or another with the green-eyed monster. In this video, we're going to dive into why this nasty critter can be such a B word and what we can do about it. By the way, my name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the Betwixt app. And I'm delving into the fascinating wisdom to be taken from myths, fairy tales and other forms of story when viewed through the lens of Jungian psychology. In this series, we're breaking down, reframing, understanding and occasionally debunking the 7 deadly sins. Today, as mentioned, we're looking at sin number 4, envy. Before we jump in, I should point out that envy and jealousy are technically 2 different emotions. In short, jealousy is that resentful, suspicious feeling we get when we think somebody is going to take away something of ours, like a partner or a job. Envy is the covetous feeling we get when we witness somebody having something that we want but don't have, i.e. bitterness about someone's good looks, cool possessions, qualifications, great relationship, or any other thing that we think we lack, regardless of whether or not that's objectively true. I've made videos about this difference in the past, but I think here it's fair to lump both envy and jealousy into the same category of sin. So for the time being, when I say envy, I mean jealousy too. Now, unlike some of the other sins on the list of 7, envy is one that seems, at least at first, a bit more black and white. What I mean by that is that while, for example, pride and lust can feel pretty positive a lot of the time, envy very rarely does. Be that as it may, just like all the others, it does have a bright side. To explore this, let's start by looking at how envy gets described in the archetypal records of human history. One of the most famous stories to represent envy as sinful is Snow White, the envy belonging, of course, to Snow White's stepmother, the evil Queen Grimhilda. This tale, popularised but not written by the Grimm brothers, goes something like this. The Princess Snow White lived in a castle with her evil stepmother, who owns an enchanted mirror that tells her who is the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? The Queen spends many years asking this question and taking comfort in the fact that she only ever hears her own name in response. But then, the day her stepdaughter turns 7, frighteningly young by the way, the mirror answers differently. Snow White, it says, is now the fairest of them all. Upon hearing this, the Queen flies into a fit of jealous rage, and she charges a huntsman to capture Snow White, take her out into the woods and kill her, demanding that he return with her heart as proof. The huntsman accepts this task and leads the girl into the forest, but as he raises his knife, little Snow White begs for her life and promises to run far away if spared, never to return to the kingdom. The huntsman, reluctantly because he's afraid of the Queen, takes pity on the girl and frees her, killing a wild animal instead so he has a heart to present back at the castle. So now Snow White wanders through the forest, lost and alone, and eventually comes across a little house inhabited by 7 dwarves, which she makes her home. But of course she isn't safe, because when the Queen next consults the magic mirror, it reflects the truth. Snow White is alive, and still the fairest of them all. Deeply vexed, Grimhilda takes matters into her own hands. She disguises herself as an old woman, makes her way into the forest to find Snow White, and gives her a shiny red apple to eat, which has been laced with poison. Trusting the old crone, Snow White takes a bite and instantly falls down as if dead. Satisfied, the Queen withdraws. Later, returning home from work, hi-ho, the dwarves find their lovely friend and, believing her dead, place her in a glass coffin. Sometime after this, a prince riding through the forest sees the beautiful Snow White in her coffin and asks to take her back to her father's castle. During the journey, though, one of the men carrying the coffin trips, causing the piece of poisoned apple to dislodge from Snow White's throat. She wakes up, fully revived, and the prince asks for her hand in marriage. They then travel to the prince's kingdom, where they have the most glorious surprise wedding. Everyone in the land is invited except for the evil queen. Furious to be left out, Grimhilda goes to the wedding anyway, and is overcome by rage when she sees that Snow White, still alive, is the bride. But she doesn't get to hatch yet another devious plan, because this story ends with the prince ordering her to wear red-hot iron slippers and dance until she dies, leaving Snow White and her love to live happily ever after. What can we learn from this story about envy/jealousy? As with all of these explorations, the first thing we need to do in order to unravel all of this is put on our grown-up glasses and view the tale through the lens of compassionate curiosity as opposed to binary black and white perspectives like good versus evil and right versus wrong. And why, I hear you ask, should we make the effort to empathise with an evil queen? Because as a deeply archetypal character, she represents a fundamental aspect of the self. Yourself, myself, everybody's self. We don't get to opt out of envy. And as uncomfortable as it may be, this isn't actually a bad thing. Envy first evolved as an emotion that's essential for the social and reproductive success of our species. We sit in a hierarchy. Like it or not, and I do not like it, that's what it means to be human. What envy does, which is important for survival, is draw our attention to the resources of other people, both those who might threaten our position by getting things that would advance them beyond us, and those we aspire to be like and can therefore show us how to improve. This means that envy is actually crucial for goal achievement. The downside, though, is that it can simultaneously cause us to feel perennially dissatisfied with what we do actually have. Social media, of course, magnifies this. In some ways, in today's culture, envy seems to have been taken to the extreme. Social psychologist Sherry Tuckle puts it like this: we look at the lives we have constructed online in which we only show the best of ourselves, and we don't measure up. We look at the self as though it were an other, and we feel envious of it. This creates an alienating sense of self-envy inside us, she says. We feel inauthentic, curiously envious of our own avatars. This is what we see with the evil queen. She's not looking at TikTok or Instagram, obviously, but she is staring at what she wants to be a perfect, unsurpassable, externalized self. This is her persona, the mask she shows the world. And that illusion of perfection is so precariously fragile. Just like Narcissus, she has built up her self-image to such an impossible level that there's no way her true self can ever live up to it. Unable to accept the reality of who she is, though, she projects her fear and self-loathing out onto Snow White, a safely other target. Her externalized hatred then provides her with something to pursue, Snow White's demise, in order to try and quell her own feeling of inadequacy. Sound familiar? Be honest. You have at least once semi-wished for someone who was doing better than you to slip up. I would hope that most of us dismiss that thought straight after having it, but for a moment, it's there. That deflating, diminishing feeling of seeing someone doing or being better than we are, especially at something we've linked to our self-worth, is a fundamentally human thing, and it hurts. The evil queen in Snow White has fused her winning beauty with a feeling of worth, and she dreads it being taken away. So she checks in with that mirror in the same way that people these days might check up on their social media accounts to see how many likes they've accrued overnight. That angst alone is not bad. It's not evil. The checking isn't really bad either, although it's probably not advised. The thing that makes this queen evil is the destructive, malicious way in which she responds to her envy. And this reaction speaks volumes about the vulnerabilities from which her evilness springs. Speaking on BBC Sound's 7 Deadly Psychologies, Professor Wendy Dryden makes an important distinction between healthy and unhealthy envy. Unhealthy envy grows from irrational beliefs about ourselves in comparison to others. For example, I must have what he has in order to feel worthwhile. Or, if someone else has what I want, then it proves that I'm inadequate. According to Dryden, unhealthy envy occurs when a strong desire to possess what another person has is combined with feelings of inferiority, resentment, and the belief that we are less worthy or incapable of achieving that same success. All that basically is the perfect storm. It causes us to interpret the success of others as a personal failure. This in turn inspires the kind of defensiveness and defeatedness that can prevent us from focusing on our own personal growth, largely because we don't believe it possible. So instead, just like poor old Grimhilda, we project our own discontent out and onto others, secretly hoping for their downfall because it's the only way we can imagine being able to even the score. Interestingly, unhealthy envy is experienced most often when we find ourselves pursuing things that we don't actually really authentically want. The feeling is based more on making things even than a heartfelt desire. Importantly, this means that unhealthy envy never gets satisfied. There will always be someone somewhere who seems to be doing better than us. To make matters worse, because we're ashamed of envy because it's a sin, we avoid it and repress it, fail to recognize it for what it is, and instead just foster a low-lying dislike for other people that we don't really understand, and that never goes away. On and on and on it goes, a never-ending nightmare that fuels rather than heals our insecurity and can raise our relationships to the ground. In other words, to find ourselves in the grip of unhealthy envy is to put on a pair of red-hot iron slippers and dance until we die. Healthy envy, unsurprisingly, is a much better alternative. As the adaptive version of that same covetous feeling, healthy envy allows us to learn from others about the things we truly want, things that can genuinely benefit our lives and also often the lives of those around us. And that's a good thing. Healthy envy is motivating. In order to get this positive version of envy, we need to address and develop two important things. First, we need to build our self-awareness, and second, we need to cultivate a very particular attitude towards other people. Here's what it comes down to in 4 simple steps. 1, we need to be aware that what we're experiencing is actually envy. We need to own the fact that we are uncomfortable because someone has something that we don't. 2, we also need to be aware of the fact that it is both inevitable and okay for others to have things that we don't have, that this doesn't make them bad people. God, that sounds so obvious to say out loud, but it's what our minds try to convince us of when we're envious. 3, we need to remember that we can almost certainly survive without this thing that we currently want, no matter how much we want it. And 4, and most importantly, we need to grasp hold and never let go of the knowledge that not having this thing we want does not, cannot make us less worthy. Queen Grimhilda's envy is rooted in an unconscious fear of worthlessness. Her beauty is the only aspect of herself that she values, and when Snow White surpasses her, she feels as though her self-worth as a person is lost. She sees in Snow White the youth and beauty she once had, which stimulates feelings of grief and inadequacy. But instead of acknowledging these feelings, she projects them onto Snow White and turns her into an enemy who must be destroyed. Remember, the Jungian take on archetypal story is this: every character, every element of a myth or fairy tale represents an aspect of the psyche, which means that the evil queen is a part of Snow White, because we all have this potential. And it also means that Snow White is a part of the evil queen. Specifically, the beautiful but naive and vulnerable Snow White represents the purity, kindness and innocence that Grimhilda has repressed and rejected, lost and forgotten. The evil queen strove to maintain an image of perfection because she longed for affirmation. If she'd only put down that cursed mirror and looked inside, into the shadow of her true self, she would have found that her inner beauty had been there all along. Grimhilda sent her own inner Snow White out into the woods to be destroyed. And in doing so, she banished the very thing she wanted to find. And we do the same when we give ourselves over to envy. The things we covet point to our most limiting stories. Those who don't believe they deserve success envy the success of others. Those who believe themselves unlovable envy the relationships of others. Those who believe that they are stupid or ugly or weak envy the wit or beauty or strength of others. But here's the thing. No one doesn't deserve success. No one is fundamentally unlovable. No one is stupid or ugly or weak in every way. These stories are works of fiction, not reality. If we only dare to acknowledge it, our envy will lead us right to them. And if we dare to rewrite them, then we'll get to take off our red-hot iron slippers and dance to a whole different tune. As always, I really hope you find this inspiring and helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share so other people can find it. And if you're the kind of person who loves both stories and personal growth, then be sure to check out our app Betwixt. The Mental Health Game. It's available on the iOS App Store and Google Play.